and welcome back to the AFA Today studios in New York. We do wish you a very Merry Christmas. It is that time of year. This is my favorite time of year. The boys seem to have greater anticipation, and we're thinking about Advent, and we're working our way through the expectation of Jesus coming, and it's just really cool. It's really special. I hope at some point in time you get to experience a Christmas that is filled with meaning, and one that causes you to reflect on the greatest gift that was ever given, because there's no other gift really worth talking about. Certainly nothing that Washington, D.C. gives us is anything special. We were talking in the last segment, Kevin McCullough with you, by the way. We were talking in the last segment about this idea of a royal prerogative. A royal prerogative. The idea that the president has dispensing power. He can just say, I don't like this part, so I'm just not going to pay attention to it. You heard from a constitutional professor, Jonathan Turley, say that this is an old idea. It came from the monarchs in Europe. Dictators, of course, practice it. Whatever they don't like, they just dispense with. But it is a very dangerous one, because if you begin to dismiss the president having any responsibility or accountability to enforce law, even if it's law that he passed and wanted, he still doesn't have the right to just say, well, I'm not going to enforce that. I'm not going to go with that, which is what he has done repeatedly with Obamacare since the passage of it, and because of all the problems that Obamacare has brought about. So what we have witnessed and what we have seen is a recent curiosity, if you will, by Congress about the extent that the president has the right, or the limits that he has, to ignore a law or to observe a law. Now, this morning in Congress, or maybe this was yesterday, I'm not sure which, but recently, since the Jonathan Turley testimony in Congress, Trey Gowdy, who's kind of a bulldog of a congressman from South Carolina, I believe, took to the floor when he had opportunity to question, and what you're about to witness is an interchange between he and a very liberal law professor about the executive powers given the establishment of what Jonathan Turley just told us. Okay, so Jonathan Turley says this is very dangerous if you allow the president to observe or not observe laws based on his own discretion. Then at some point in time, that creates a very weak system. Well, if that's true, then there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I'm thankful for Congressman Gowdy for thinking them through and attempting to get answers. Take a listen. Here's how it went.
Gentleman from New York, the chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes of questions. It strikes me that the law can require action or forbid action. The law can forbid the possession of child pornography. The law can, in some instances, require you to file an income tax return. Mr. Lazarus, is the chief executive constitutionally capable of ignoring both categories of law?
Well, as I said several times, Congressman Gowdy, the president cannot refuse to apply or enforce a law for policy reasons.
Well, let's analyze that for a second. Congress decided in its collective wisdom that if you possess X amount of a controlled substance, you are going to get X amount of time in prison. You may like mandatory minimums, you may not like them. This administration summarily dispensed with that law. So my question to you, again, is can the chief executive fail to enforce categories of law that are both permissive and mandatory?
No, it is well established that the executive branch has prosecutorial discretion to decline enforcement.
And what are the limits of that prosecutorial discretion?
You know, very frankly, I'm not an expert on that.
Well, let me ask you this. Can the president, let's assume that a statute required you to show 2 pieces of identification to purchase a firearm. Can the chief executive knock that down to 1?
I guess I'd have to know a little bit more, but I would...
It's a very simple fact pattern. You have to show 2 forms of ID to possess or purchase a firearm. Can the chief executive, under his pardon authority or his prosecutorial discretion authority, knock that down to just 1 form of identification?
Well, I'm not aware of limits on the president's pardon authority.
Okay, and
So you
see,
would say-
that's where, and we're back live in the studio, Kevin McCullough. This took place in the Congress yesterday. But did you notice what he just said? Well, I'm not sure. But then Congressman Gowdy said, but what about if he invokes pardon authority or prosecutorial discretion authority? One is to pursue, one is to forgive. In other words, to dispense. To say, we're going to suspend the rules here, and I'm either going to, under my prosecutorial discretion, choose not to enforce, or through my pardon discretion, I'm going to choose to ignore. Now, all of that is important for another really big reason. Because if it applies to all matters of law, if it applies to every area of law, if there is no piece of law, federal law, that the president cannot say that about, what could that ultimately mean? 888-589-8840. I want you to think this through with me. This is binge thinking today, 101, Kevin McCullough standing the mast, but this is something that we have to do. Obliterate confusion, pursue truth, and love clarity. That's how we're going to survive this, right? So the liberal law professor, kind of getting tongue-tied, doesn't know, but then he comes back and says, no, there's no limits to the president's pardon authority or to his prosecutorial authority. See where it goes from there. Take a listen.
He could.
Under the pardon authority, the president can pardon just about anyone. Not that he should. No.
Even before the act is committed?
That's the reason for...
Can he do it before the act is committed? That's my question.
I'm sorry?
Can he do it before the act is committed?
That's above my pay grade. I don't really know that.
If the president can fail to enforce immigration laws, can the president likewise fail to enforce election laws?
Whether the president can pardon someone before a prosecution is initiated or before an act...
Well, I think I know the answer to that question. Now, my question was before the act was committed. He certainly can before the prosecution. My question is this: if you can dispense with immigration laws, or marijuana laws, or mandatory minimums, can you also dispense with election laws?
Again, I think we've gone over this ground many times.
Well, just humor me. Let's do it one more time. Can the president suspend election laws?
No.
Why not? If he can suspend mandatory minimum and immigration laws, why not election laws?
Because we live in a government of laws, and the president is bound to obey them and apply them.
Well, he's not applying the ACA, and he's not applying immigration laws, and he's not applying marijuana laws, and he's not applying mandatory minimums. What's the difference with election laws?
We have a disagreement as to whether, in fact, he is applying those laws. My view is that he is applying those laws.
Did Eric Holder instruct his prosecutors to no longer follow the mandatory minimums with respect to charging decisions?
Now, this is an area where I really don't know nearly as much as you do, Congressman.
I'd find that shocking that anybody would not know more than I do on any topic. Who would you like? You want me to ask Professor Turley?
That my impression is that he's not exactly doing what you've just said.
Well, tell me how I'm wrong, because Eric Holder sent out a memo that we are no longer going to put in the indictment the drug amounts. Do you agree with me that Congress can pass mandatory minimums?
Constitutionally, yes.
Do you agree that Congress can pass statutory maximums?
Pardon me?
Can Congress also pass statutory maximums? In other words, you can't get more than 30 years for a crime.
Of course.
Can a president exceed a statutory maximum?
Can he extinguish, did you say?
No, can he exceed it?
Can he exceed it? Well, how would he do that? I mean, keep someone in prison beyond his prison term.
Well, if you can put him in prison for less time than Congress says is the law, can you also do it for more time than Congress says is the law?
It's really, it's not, this is kind of fruitless because
it's fruitless because you're losing the discussion there, Mr. Lazarus. That's a very liberal law professor that was on this panel. That was before Congress, and I think one of the most important series of questions that's been asked of legal minds. If the executive branch can summarily dismiss the application of law for or against positive or negative in favor of laws that they're in favor of, against laws that they're in favor of laws that they're against laws that they're against, whatever the combination is. It seems to me to be a significant issue. And while much of America has been sleeping for the last 6 years, there have been consistently a choosing to do this and not do that. This is the law, but we're not going to defend that law before the legal system because we disagree with that law. There is this law that says mandatory minimums must be applied to offenses of this crime. But because we feel like we can make an argument that it may be racist or something else, whether or not that's even true, we're going to choose to discretionarily ignore that law. When it comes to the enforcement of his own signature piece of legislation, which is the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, and the requirements that were put on employers and the requirements that are put on taxpayers and the requirements that are put on states in order to comply with the law, it has been a game of guess you are, guess you aren't. Who the heck knows? It's almost impossible to understand. I mean, that's how sophisticated they have taken the approach to the enforcement of the Affordable Care Act. And the president himself personally saying, well, I'm going to choose to forego that, and I'm going to choose to fix this, and I'm going to choose you don't get to do that. You don't get to executive branch make these decisions to change the defense, the meaning, and the implementation and the execution of the law. That is not a power embodied by the Constitution and granted to the executive branch. Only the courts can interpret, and only the Congress can write. You don't get to make it up as you go along. Now, I want to ask those of you that have been with me, because I haven't taken any calls, and this is very abnormal for me thus far, but you've now heard, I think, two of the more important exchanges that have taken place in Congress in the last 6 years. One dealing with the royal prerogative of the president to say, I'm the ruler, so I'm not going to enforce this or enforce that. And you just heard a member of Congress say to a law professor, is it possible that his choosing to ignore certain laws on some manner will allow him to also ignore election laws coming up? Do you think, and I'm just going to ask the American people the simple question, do you think that the American people should be worried that an administration might choose to use the executive branch in such a way, consistent with their behavior to date, in terms of ignoring law, to ignore election laws altogether? 888-589-8840. I'm Kevin McCullough, and I want to know what you think. I'm not saying that is what's going to happen, but I want to know, based on everything you know to date about the transparency, honesty, accountability, visibility of this administration and how they operate and what they have done by way of law enforcement to date, do you think it's a fair concern that Congressman Gowdy had to say, well, what's keeping him from ignoring the election laws? Friends, if somebody doesn't ask this question, we may wake up one day and wonder how we got schnookered. We've got to have to ask this question. Whether it's going to happen or not doesn't matter. We have to be vigilant. We have to understand that this is something that must be paid attention to. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Before we go to our next break, let me get to Rick calling from New Jersey. Rick, welcome. You're on with Kevin McCullough. Glad you're with us.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, Kevin, I enjoy your show. I truly do. But I listen to AFA. It's all I listen to, AFR talk. But every day I listen, y'all have congressmen on, you have senators on, and boy, they're really talking about what they're going to do. And they got these constitutional lawyers in, and And the questions that they're asking, they already know the answers to the questions that they're asking, but they're gutless and spineless because they won't do anything about it. I don't care if they call themselves conservative. All they're doing is earning a paycheck and making themselves look good when they come on your show, because they're not doing anything, and they're not going to, because they've got it made. They've been exempt from Obamacare and everything else. They're not worried about anything. They're certainly not worried about us. They just come on these Christian talk shows and they make themselves sound and look good, and they don't do anything. And that's no reflection on you. You have them on because they're talking about they're going to right the ship. They're not writing anything.
Well, let me ask you about, because I haven't had a guest on this show in, I can't remember the last time I had a guest on. But the soundbite that you just heard from Congressman Gowdy, questioning the lawyer, do you think it's a relevant question that he's asking, that if the president could ignore law on some level, that there's a possibility that he could ignore election law as well?
No, sir.
Do you think it's important that someone asks that question?
I don't. Yes, it is. But he already knows the answer to it. But why isn't he doing it? The man should have already been impeached. He's committed treason. He breaks every law that he passes and that his people pass. He breaks them all.
Well, the problem with impeachment at present is that if the House, and they probably have the votes to impeach, but if they did, the Democrats control the Senate, which is where you go to get the conviction, and that's the problem. Kevin McCullough on AFA Today. Stay with us.